Hi, everyone. Welcome to Craft. We are having a little bit of feedback, but it's going to go away. I can just feel it. Look, it already did. Hi, welcome. We are here. This is Craft, Authors in Conversation. I am super excited to have my guest this evening, Dr. John Torres, aka Dr. Disaster, senior medical correspondent for NBC News and MSNBC. And we're going to talk about his brand new book, Dr. Disaster's Guide to Surviving Everything. Before we get into that, I am going to do a little bit of housekeeping, as I always do. So this is Craft. We normally host this live here in Asheville, North Carolina at Little Jumbo Cocktail Bar. We have a wonderful time there. Rob's Bookseller is our official host, selling our books, and the wonderful Shawl Gray, co-owner of Little Jumbo, always crafts a very special cocktail for every guest that we have. Now, in the age of the corona, we have taken it online, which allows me to talk to people all over the country, such as Dr. Torres. And we will still have a specialty cocktail this evening that Shawl over at Little Jumbo has crafted for us. And we are still selling books available through Malaprops. How can we do that? So there's a little green button right down there at the bottom of your screen that says Buy Books by John and Denise. If you click on that, it takes you to a special page over at Malaprops' website. And if you order a book, you can actually put in the notes that you would like a signed copy, and Dr. Torres will get some signed book plates out to Malaprops, and they will stick them in there before they ship you your book. So how fantastic is that? So thank you, Malaprops, for being here instead of being physically present with me. If you have questions, please put them in the Ask a Question section. It makes it easier for me to make sure we get to everything everyone has said. The chat is open, though. Have a great time in the chat. Joe, as always, is lurking in the chat. Although tonight we may actually see Joe. Who knows? He's probably in the basement with a pith helmet and a mag light and a Leatherman. I don't know what's going on. But we're gonna come up with there's gonna be so much information tonight. Really fun stuff, very important stuff as well. I will send out a recap at some point within the next week that'll have links and information and all that sort of stuff. We'll talk for a little while. We'll see the cocktail. We'll answer some questions. But right now, hi, Dr. John Torres. Thank you for joining me.
How are you doing? And I'll take blame for two separate things. One, the feedback, that was me. I had two windows open. I closed one, so now we're doing okay. But number two, all those little trinkets and things that Joe bought to survive, that's my fault.
Please don't even start with me. We're going to get to that. There's what is in my basement right now is horrifying, and it's all your fault. So it is very rare that I'm sitting here with I keep little notes on note cards about things that I want to talk about, and it's very rare that little shorthand notes are trampolines, staying alive. It's a little bit all over the map. And this is a very important book. It is a survivalist guide. It is about taking care of yourself in case of an emergency or difficult times, which goodness knows we're experiencing. But it's also a very lighthearted book and very approachable book, which I like. So, I have to start with, what do rabbit eyeballs taste like?
It's interesting. And the story, I got to give you a little background to that. So I tend to be a little bit smart alecky, and I tend to say things that I probably shouldn't say sometimes. And we were in the middle of our survival training when I was a cadet at the Air Force Academy, which is one of the things I talk about in the book. But in the middle of survival training, we get a rabbit. We end up having to use every part of the rabbit because they're just trying to show us that, yes, the rabbit, you're going to eat things you don't normally eat because you're trying to survive. And they decided somebody had to eat the eyeball. Well, I was being Mr. Smart Aleck like I normally am. So guess who they picked? Me. So I got to eat the eyeball. And it tastes like a very rubbery balloon full of salt water.
So there wasn't sauteing. You didn't have any garlic on hand or
It was raw, and I don't even want to think about any kind of germs or parasites. I don't know what was in that thing, but it was, and it just shows you that there's things when you're trying to survive. And again, one of the main themes of the book is having that will to survive. And when you have that will to survive, you will do things you won't normally do in life. And part of that is eating a rabbit's eyeball to get that nutrition.
And the reason I like that anecdote, aside from the fact that I was just super curious about what a rabbit eyeball tasted like, is that you're on NBC now as the senior medical correspondent, but you come out of emergency room medicine. You come out of, the Air Force. You have done survival training. So talk a little bit about SEER, what that was, and kind of how that shaped you as a survivalist person.
So that is a survival course you take between your first and second year at the Air Force Academy, and it's SERE, and it's survival, evasion, resistance, and escape. The last two parts of it are resistance and escape, and that's what happens if you get captured behind enemy lines and they take you to prisoner of war camp, and they teach you the things you need to do to, once you're inside that camp, to survive and potentially escape and get out of there. But, so that's half of the program. Not as applicable in the real world environment, although you do learn some lessons about yourself and the things you can tolerate. But the first part, that survival and evasion, is extremely important, because part of what we were doing is we were evading the enemy. So we were constantly on the go. So we didn't have time to sit down and build any kind of elaborate traps or anything. We were basically on the run the whole time, and you have to learn how to survive doing that. So they taught you beforehand, gave you about a week's worth of lessons, including lessons in the outdoors, and then they set you free. They basically pushed you out into the wild with just maybe 800 calories worth of food. It was barely any food at all. And it was you and two other people, and they said, you got to go from point A to point B to point C, and you had a 3-day trek you had to go on to get to the final point. And they said, go, and you went. And the whole time you were trying to learn how to survive. And I remember one of the big things is we were dying of thirst, and we had canteens, and the canteens, we left with a full canteen of water because they were being nice to us, right? But we drank that very quickly, and then we're dying of thirst, and we came upon this marshy, swamplandy area, and we thought, this is what they taught us. Let's do this. We just cleared out the mud, stuck our canteens in there, and it was at least half full of mud. And you're drinking a canteen and eating mud at the same time, but you're getting the water that you need. And so you learn early on that, hey, if I'm going to survive, I'm going to do things again that I would never, ever do. But it taught me a lot of life lessons. And the main lesson it taught me was that I can get through anything. It gave me the confidence to realize that no matter what's happening, if I just take a second to think about what I need to do, take a step back, and then start moving forward, I can get through it.
That I find I don't know if you ever mentioned this. I'm actually an Army brat. So I grew up, and a lot of my friends that I went to school with when I was young went into the military. So I know a lot of Delta guys, special forces, all those sorts of people. And, you mentioned 3 days, you mentioned blowing through your water really quickly. And that brings me to, so our talk tonight is going to be a little bit about writing and a little bit about, fun stuff like rabbit eyeballs, but also a little bit of very useful information that anyone can use, including if you're driving on a highway with your family and it starts snowing really hard and you're stuck in your car. The rule of 3. So can you talk a little bit about the rule of 3?
You bet. And the rule of 3 comes about because oftentimes people get in situations like that and they make the wrong decisions as to what they need to do initially. And part of that comes from, if you've ever taken psychology courses or any other courses, Maslow's hierarchy, which is basically the triangle of things we need to survive. Well, that's surviving in a normal world. There's things like shelter, social contact, things like that. The rule of 3s is more aligned to what you need to do to stay alive and basically getting down to that level. And it goes by this. 3 minutes, you can survive about 3 minutes without oxygen. So that goes without saying. We all need to breathe. We're lucky, unless we're in a water situation or something like that, we have oxygen. That's not as big a problem. But then the next ones come into line. You can survive 3 hours without shelter. And this is in extreme situations. Like you mentioned, a car sliding off the road, you're in an extreme blizzard, or you're in an extreme heat situation. You can survive 3 hours without shelter. You can survive 3 days without water, and you can survive 3 weeks without food. And so that tells you what you need to look for. So if something's happening, the very first thing you need to do, obviously, if you're breathing, the very next thing you need to do is find shelter. Water can wait a little bit, and then start looking for water. Food can wait a lot bit, and then start looking for food. You're going to be as hungry as can be. hungrier than you've ever been, but you don't need that to survive. So that rule of threes tells you how to put the priorities in there so you can make sure you stay alive, your family stays alive.
So much of this book is really, really practical advice. But one of the things I liked about it is you just mentioned Maslow, and Maslow's hierarchy of needs is one of my favorite things that I've read about for years. And you also talk about situational awareness. And there's almost kind of there's almost sort of like a meditative aspect to survival. We spend, so much time like this, right? In front of our phones, and I find myself doing it, very out of touch with what's going on around me. And, one of the aspects of mindfulness is, of course, like sitting and being present, and what do you hear and what do you see and what do you smell and all of that. And you talk about situational awareness actually being key for people who are survivalist professionals. Can you talk a little bit about that?
And it's amazing because you brought up a good point that I don't often put together, but it's that mindfulness, those lessons you learn there that also apply to survival. One of them is that situational awareness we talked to. The other one is, taking a second, taking a deep breath before you start doing things, and that helps calm you down. And those are very important tips. But the situational awareness is one of the most important things out there. And I always tell people the big important things to understand when it comes to survival, and that's why we say surviving any situation, because there are themes behind it. And one of those is that situational awareness, understanding where you are, what's going on around you, and what you need to do. And this doesn't have to be an in-depth thing. This just has to do with keeping your head up. As I tell my children all the time, and they were tired of hearing it when they were kids, but keep your head on a swivel, keep looking around.
Watch your six.
Exactly, especially when you're in the crowd. It's easy to go in the crowd and just keep moving forward and keep looking forward. What's not as easy is just to take and you don't even have to necessarily do a 300 or 180 degree glance. You can do a 90 degree glance. We have peripheral vision. You'll see behind you. And so, if you don't want to look obvious, you can pretend like you're looking at a shop window as you pass by. Just kind of look at the window and glance it back, and just do that every now and then, every few minutes, just to make sure there's not something coming up behind you. This is not a reason to be paranoid. It's just a reason to be aware. But you need to do that no matter what environment you're in, especially in a survival situation, because you're looking for all the things you can use and how you can get out of there. But even in everyday situations, whether you're in a shopping mall, whether you're walking down the street, if you're at a concert or theater, just understand where you are and what the environment around you is and what it could potentially do to you.
And one of the things I'm sure your kids were also sick of this too, where are the exits? Where are the exits?
We going to movie theaters, and I think they're just like, stop talking. You sit down and I go, okay, if something happened, how would you get out of here? And typically, and unfortunately, this comes from lessons that have been learned around the world. One of them was a fire in Brazil that Joe and I talked about, and he wrote about. Is, in that fire in Brazil, a lot of people died because they went the wrong direction, and they ended up in a bathroom they thought was an exit, and they crowded in there, couldn't get out, and they died from both fire and smoke inhalation. There's been other instances in shootings where people have gone in the wrong direction. So knowing where the exits are is extremely important. And so one of the things when we sit down at the movie theater, I'd say, if you had to get out of here quick, how would you get out of here? And like, oh, the exit's right there. Okay, see, that's blocked for whatever reason. How would you get out of here? And like, oh, it turns out there's one right behind me here. And, and we all have gotten tired of hearing that flight attendant give their same speech time after time, but it's important. And what they say is important, that the nearest exit might actually be behind you. And so you just want to know, and I'll do that on the airplane. And I'm surprised at how many people don't do that. But when I get on, I look for the exits, and I look at that little card and go, okay, there they are. So if something happens, I know that 2 rows behind me is an exit, or 10 rows in front of me. I know which direction I'm going.
I was actually in an aborted takeoff once, and we skidded off the runway, and it was, you can't see, you're not driving, so you can't see what's in front of the plane. So I'm like, is it water? Is it another plane? Is it what's going on? And then I thought, well, what am I gonna do? What am I gonna do first? And I started thinking about the flight attendant, and the nearest exit might be behind you. But you actually tell a story, and this kind of relates to the situational awareness about being with a younger Air Force pilot, and you gave him a task, and it was about sort of being present in the moment to kind of keep yourself, center yourself in the midst of survival.
Exactly. And we were flying, and this happens occasionally when you fly. You get into weather, and sometimes the weather you get beforehand, especially this is, a couple of decades ago when the systems weren't quite as accurate as they are now, we would get in trouble because we're heading towards thunderstorms or they would build around us, and we would need to get out of there or else we're going to get into more trouble. And so it would get in the book I talk about, you suck up the seat cushion. Basically, you have this pucker factor, we call it, where you are sitting there and you are in trouble. You have to do certain things in certain ways, or you're going to get into more trouble and you're potentially going to die. Well, we were in that situation, and I was an instructor pilot, so I was a senior pilot. My co-pilot was fairly new, and he was starting to panic a little bit. And he was starting to get real worried about where we were and what we were going to do. And I could sense that he was panicking. And so I gave him a task, and I said, why don't you get on the radio and just start calling different airports and find out where we can go. I knew where we were going to go. I didn't have a problem with that, but I was trying to give him a task to do to calm him down. And once he got that task, he was able to take that breath. Like you said, he was able to get in the moment. He was able to take that breath and recenter himself. And then he all of a sudden started being very helpful at that point. When we got off the airplane, it was interesting. We were having a conversation when we got to where we needed to go. He was saying, I was completely freaking out, but I kept looking over at you, and you were just as stone cold as could be. You were just in control. And I told him, I said, here's the thing you're going to learn as a pilot. I said, especially when you're in command of the aircraft. I was freaking out inside. I'll admit that. I was completely freaking out inside. But if I had shown that outwardly, you were already in a situation where you were freaking out. The two of us would have been freaking out, and we would have done nobody any good. We would just fed on each other, and we probably would have crashed. And so even though inside I'm freaking out, I have to be able to swallow that down and at least give you the pretense of I'm in control. I'm in charge here, and I'm doing the things we need to do, because then that calms you down, and then we can both do what we need to do.
It's again, it's interesting to me. It's that presence and that mindfulness and that awareness. You started off in the Air Force. You're now on NBC, but in between there, you went to medical school and became a doctor and worked in emergency. How did you go from Air Force to emergency room doctor?
That's my wife's like, stop, pick one thing, stop doing all this. So I went into the Air Force, and like most people at the Air Force Academy, you come out and you go to pilot training, and I had a blast. I did that for 8 years, fantastic time, learned a lot of adventures, which was great. And then during this time frame, I realized that I also wanted to be a doctor. And so I started working towards that. And then when I got out of the Air Force, luckily I have a wife, Linda, who's just super fantastic. And she was very supportive, because that meant basically going from having a job with salary and income to nothing, and actually paying.
Yeah,
exactly. And so, we were older when I went to med school. I was 32. We had two children by the time we started. And so, thankfully, again, she was extremely supportive and very helpful. Went to med school. Partway through med school, I started working on we do rotations in our third year. And those rotations kind of tell you what you want to do. And I thought I wanted to be an orthopedic surgeon until I did a surgery rotation and realized that wasn't my cup of tea. I didn't want to be in a room doing surgery all day long. And my next rotation was the emergency.
Wait, why?
It just wasn't my bag. It wasn't my cup of tea. You're in a room with four walls. You're standing still for hours on end doing one concentrated thing. And I, like a lot of emergency room doctors, have a bit of attention deficit. And so I wanted to be able to do something that would cater to that. My next rotation.
You want to be in the cockpit when the plane is going crazy.
Exactly. I want all sorts of things happening. I'm a bit of adrenaline junkie. The next rotation was emergency medicine. And in the ER, you go from patient to patient. You never know what's coming in. There's a heart attack. 2 hours later, there's a gunshot wound. There's a sore throat, trampoline accident, which you had brought up. So these things kind of float around, and you have to be able to do that. And that was definitely my flavor. I love doing that. So I started doing it. And then one thing I found out is that really was a great addition to my military training. Because of my military training, I did a lot of disaster preparedness type situations. Being a pilot, you do a lot of seat of the pants kind of stuff where you have to improvise. Same thing in ER, you have to improvise based on your knowledge. And so that just segued into it. And then I went back into the Guard and Reserve and did that for the next 24 years on top of my civilian practice, where I was able to go around the world and do a lot of different things. So I've been very lucky in my careers. And then it got to NBC News, and that led me to be able to do a lot of other things too, a lot more adventures that continue.
Well, I'm going to talk about how you got to NBC, because I think that's really interesting. But we have to go back to the trampolines because this cracked me up because one of the biggest scars on my body is from a trampoline accident.
See?
Yeah. And the trampoline, I was not allowed to jump on that one. And the reason it's a scar is because I hid the injury for hours because I didn't get in trouble for jumping on the trampoline. If we'd gone in earlier, I probably wouldn't have a big scar on my shin right now. But talk about, it just cracks me up how you like, as you spend more years in an emergency room, you can just start to spot what's happened.
You can just start to spot, people in the waiting room. When they come in the room, as soon as you open the door and walk in the room, you can spot exactly what's going on. And with the trampoline accident, it's almost always the same scenario. There's usually a kid, and usually it's a smaller kid, 10 or under, that's pretty lightweight. And then there's a dad who's not lightweight. And the kid is crying because something hurts. The dad is very sheepish looking, and the mom is not happy looking. And you figured out pretty quickly what happened, because this happens a lot. And I tell people all the time, trampolines can be safe if you use them appropriately, but nobody really does. And so my kids, to this day, they still always give me a hard time for never letting them have a trampoline when they were growing up, because I'm like, no, I've seen too many broken bones. I've seen too many head injuries. We're not going to do it. And what typically happens is a kid gets on a trampoline by themselves and they weigh, 40 pounds or whatever. And they're on a trampoline bouncing up and down, having a good time, bouncing back and forth. And then sometimes another kid will get on there and they'll bounce and they'll do all that stuff. Great. Life's good. They're doing okay. Well, at some point, dad decides he's 10 again and he wants to get on the trampoline, right? And so dad gets on the trampoline and they start off like this, but dad's heavier. So all of a sudden, dun, 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 and then dad will do something. Look at this trick, boom, and kid will go launching. And even though they have the nets around them, those nets aren't made to keep you in if you launch very quickly and very fast out of the side. And so that'll happen. Sometimes it's a couple of kids on there. And if they're synchronous, not bad. But once they get asynchronous, then boom, they start getting the head injuries. And so again, that's what you see them in the emergency room. That happens a lot more often than most people realize.
And then every once in a while, a gun falls out of somebody's pocket.
Every now and then.
That's my favorite.
Yeah, we have these situations in the emergency room where we'll have these people come in and they will be traumas for whatever reason, or they're unconscious. And so we have to go through different pockets and stuff. And, and this has happened more than once, where all of a sudden the gun will pop out and you're sitting there as, you're in the ER, there's no police around at that point. So you have to call the police in, and you're thankful it didn't discharge. But at the same time, it gets the hair on the back of your neck up going,
Sure.
It's different. If I'm in a combat situation, when I went to war in Iraq and stuff, we expect that. But when you're in a city emergency room, you don't quite expect that, even though it might happen. It's not something you expect with every patient that comes in.
The, preparedness is, I think, kind of viewed as a little bit of, you're either like an extreme, survivalist person, or, it's very kind of, people view it as very sort of, public service announcement, kind of dull. So the CDC decided to make it a little more exciting by talking about zombies. So, and that actually caught on a little bit more than they wanted. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I actually missed this whole thing.
It was absolutely successful to the point where it crashed their website. So one of the things you learn about disaster preparedness is nobody really pays attention to you. I spent years in the military doing this, and civilian life working with hospitals to get disaster preparedness programs going up, and a lot of lip service is paid. We'll come and say, we need this. And we'll say, yeah, we'll think about it. Thanks. Give us the paperwork. Well, CDC had the same issue. CDC would put out tons of how to survive a hurricane, how to survive a tornado, how to survive all these different things. Nobody ever really went to the websites because people tend not to think about that. Well, somebody got the genius idea, and this was a few years ago when The Walking Dead was very popular. And they got the idea of saying, hey, let's put out a website and put out some PR information about how to survive a zombie apocalypse. And they put a lot of information out there thinking they'd get a little bit of attention. It completely crashed their website. It completely went down because so many people were going on there. And then they went on the news and they had to say, people were like, reporters were like, why is the CDC wasting money on something that's never going to happen? And they were telling them, no, you don't get it.
John?
Yeah,
or is it?
I can't talk about that on this show. However, my very late night show, but the main thing they said was, hey, here's the deal. We didn't put that in there because we think there's going to be a zombie apocalypse. We put that in there because the way you prepare for a zombie apocalypse is the same way you prepare for any other contingency in life, be it a hurricane or tornado.
What I love. What is similar about preparing for the zombie apocalypse and preparing for other emergencies in life?
And it's the same thing. Number one is the biggest thing is having that mindset, that will to survive. I'm going to make it through this. And then preparing yourself beyond that. And so by being prepared, think about a zombie apocalypse. What's one of the first?
Situational awareness.
Yeah, situational awareness, knowing what's going on around you. If you're in your house, you're not going to leave your house. You're going to stay there and try to protect it as best you can. And that means having the things inside your house you need. If, on the other hand, you decide it's better to leave, you need to be able to leave as quick as you can. And that means having a go bag, a bug out bag, having something ready that you can grab and you can just head out, because you're not going to have time to walk through the house collecting things. You need it collected now.
I love the idea. Actually, I mean, there have been, Ready Freddies and the bug out bag and go bags and all of those sorts of things have been around for a while. They're really, really important though. If you ever need to I've had dear friends who've been in a house fire. I mean, if you ever need to get out of your house very quickly or get somewhere very quickly, you need a bag to take with you. Now, some people take this to an extreme, which thanks to you, my husband has started to do. It's show and tell right now. This is my tack. It's hot pink.
Nice.
This is my sweet, right? Pretty awesome. It does all sorts of things. I'm not going to open it because I will hurt myself. Although I assume if I do something really catastrophic right now during this stream, you can just talk me through it.
There you go.
Then I have my very amazing Leatherman. But
Joe's amazing.
Oh yeah, but also, there are things in my basement now because of you that are there are things like combat wipes. We have a straw that apparently allows us to suck pond water.
Yeah, the Life Straw. It's a great straw.
Tell me about the Life Straw. I found this fascinating because water is you have shelter water, super important.
It's super important. And there's a lot of different filter systems you can get out there. You can either use chemical filtration, which is like the iodine tablets, the chlorine tablets, those types of things, or mechanical filter, which are the filters you use. Well, up until now, the filters have been pretty big. And I have one from years ago that had a little pump action, and you would have to put the tube in your pump. Again, in survival training, sometimes you're on the go, you're moving, you have to get from point A to point B, and you don't really have time to do all that stuff. So they came out with this thing called the Life Straw, and it's essentially looks like a straw, looks like a big tube with a straw on the end of it, and it has a filter inside. And the idea is you stick one end in the water and the other end like a straw, and you just suck up the water, and it cleans it as it goes through. And it does a fantastic job of getting rid of germs, getting rid of parasites, probably gets rid of that mud too that I had to drink down when I was in survival training. And so, but the thing to do with any of these filters is realize that they have a certain life, meaning that you can only do a certain number of gallons. And so you want to keep an eye on the gallons you've used through the filter, and then at some point replace that filter. But having it in a go bag or a bug out bag is extremely essential, because you never know when you're going to have to leave and go somewhere else. And that somewhere else might be outdoors where all you have is a stream and you have a choice between drinking it and getting sick. Well, this lets you drink it without getting sick.
When you talk about, you can go to stores and find, this kind of first aid kit, that kind of first aid kit, and somebody else has kind of packed them for you. But you talk about being able to basically walk into, a Home Depot or a Lowe's or a Walgreens and pretty much put together your own go bag. So, I mean, what kind of hints would you give somebody who said, I don't have one of these in my house. I want to get ready to go in case there's we live in a place where there are hurricanes, there's all sorts of stuff that can come up. People out on the West Coast, we have some West Coast folks watching, you got wildfires. I mean, sometimes you got to move quickly.
And, and one of the important things is that first aid kit. That's extremely important. It's something you need in your bug out bag. They make the commercial first aid kits, which are fine, but they often have things you don't need and they don't have things that you do need. And so I'm a big proponent of customizing it. And essentially you can go to any pharmacy, you can even go to dollar stores and find the first aid equipment you need. And that's usually, just think about the injuries, it's usually bandages. And we go through the book on different things you can need, bandages, way to apply the bandages, burn creams, different things like that. And, and some pain medication too. And by that, I mean, the ibuprofen, the Tylenols, those types of pain medications. But even beyond that, the things that, and we talk about the MacGyver in you. You want to become a MacGyver. And that
Yeah.
means that's the Home Depot thing. Going to the Home Depot, exactly that. One of the better things to have in your go bag, duct tape. You can use duct tape for so many different things, including if somebody has a big gashing wound, you can use the duct tape to temporarily bring the ends together to keep it from bleeding excessively until you can get to help. And so there's so many things you can do with these, and just, you got to constantly think outside the box. You know, if I have this duct tape, what can I use it for? If I have this certain type of pliers, what can I use it for other than just putting a screw in the ground, you know, that kind of thing. And so just constantly thinking outside the box when you're looking around. And again, my thought process through all this, and Joe's as well, is, you know, not to make people paranoid, but just to make people think.
Yes, exactly. And think about their particular situation. Again, your own situational awareness. You also talk about surviving in the wilderness. And I have to share a picture that, you know, I think will explain to you one aspect of the book that spoke to me. This guy. Can you see him?
Oh, that's your backyard, isn't it?
Yeah, that's about 10 feet from my back door. So, you know, this guy's big. He's not the only person who shows up in our backyard when they're awake. What do you do? And this is not a crazy question, because this happens to me several times a year. What do you do when you see a black bear the size of your car right outside your back door? Or sometimes like in your blueberry bushes when you're out there trying to harvest some stuff.
Well, first and foremost, if you're inside, you stay inside. That's probably the biggest point. And what I tell people all the time is there's essentially 3 reasons a bear attacks you, or any animal attacks you. You know, people always think about the rabid animal that's attacking them because it went crazy, whatever. That's very rare. That hardly ever happens. But most of the time in a natural environment, there's 3 reasons an animal like this bear will attack you. Number 1 is because you surprise them. And that's probably, you're in the blueberry bush, it doesn't know you're there, and you surprise them. And it's going to do what we all do, it's going to lash out. Number 2, you're interfering with its food supply. That one was out of the bird feeder, and it wants the bird. It wants
interfering with my food supply.
Exactly. But you have to remember that bear outweighs you by at least, 10 to 1 probably. And then number 3, and this is probably the scariest one, is they're protecting their young, especially with bears. They're protecting their cubs. And mama bear will die to protect her cubs. And so you have to realize that. And so if you're inside, stay inside. It's tempting to get video footage. It's tempting to go out there. And if you've seen, there's tons of footage. Yeah, I know. I was on the phone call with Joe, and he's like, Denise, get back inside. If you look online, you can see videos of people in Yellowstone. There's buffalo there, and they get close to the buffalo, and all of a sudden they don't realize that buffalo can run very fast, or bison can run very fast, and they're very aggressive. And so, they get hurt. So again, respect their environment because they're there. But at the same time, if something does happen and you encounter something like the bear in the blueberry bush, the one thing to do is to be as still and quiet as possible and slowly back up and let the thing know that you're not aggressive. Slowly back up. And that usually works the vast majority of times. If it doesn't work and the bear starts coming towards you, then stay still and make yourself huge. And by that, I mean, open a coat if you have one, raise your arms, scream and shout, and then you become an aggressive animal too, and the bear will probably leave you alone. If that doesn't work and the bear does attack, well, fighting is your only option, really.
Really? Unless not lay on the ground and get in a ball.
That's if it's a grizzly bear, and that's the difference between the black bears and the brown bears.
This is about me. I want to know about the black bears.
But so with the black bears, which is what we mostly have here, it's basically, fighting them at all extent, just being aggressive, fighting them, because they're going to go for the least amount of energy expenditure they have to, and the least amount of trouble. So if you start fighting back, especially if you can pick up any kind of sticks or wood or anything, then they're going to back off as soon as they can. It might injure you a little bit, but they're going to back off. The one thing you don't want to do is you don't want to turn and run. And the main reason is because all these are predators, and their instinct is to chase a running prey. And so if you turn and run, that instinct kicks in, and bears are a lot faster than you are. They can climb trees, they can run downhill. All those myths about bears, about climb a tree or run downhill, those don't work. Bears can run downhill faster than you. They can climb trees faster than you. So essentially the tips I'm talking about are the things that work.
The hard thing to do is to get past the don't run thing. That's actually, that's the hard thing, because they're quieter than you think they're going to be. They're very, very, very large. People don't like that guy on my patio. He was literally bigger than our sedan. And you see them and you think, oh my God, I would hear something like that if it were, 100 feet away. You don't. They just kind of mosey, because why do they have to be worried? They're just
like I said, that surprise is number one. But you have to remember too, they're as scared of you as you are of them. And so that surprise is what gets them rankled up and they start defending themselves. And that's where you have issues. And as far as you're right, natural instinct is to turn and run, which is the worst thing to do. And
well, usually I yell. I do yell.
Yeah. And that's why
it works.
Yeah, it works, because they're, like I said, they're as scared of you as you are of them. They want to get away. And that's why in the book I say, for the vast majority of incidences you're in survival situations, taking that second to take a deep breath, like you said, the mindfulness, the centering yourself, and just calming yourself down, and then figuring out where to go. I bring up that one of my favorite movies, which is The Martian, and Matt Damon is in there. And at the end of The Martian, they ask him how he survived, and he said, I'm going to loosely quote him. He said, "There's 1,000 things that have gone wrong. You need to start with one thing, fix that, and move on to the next thing, fix that, and move on. You can't handle them all at once." It's the same thing here. First thing you need to do is just relax yourself and then go, okay, what do I need to do at this point? It helps to have information beforehand, though.
It's almost like a triage of thought, which is kind of similar to what you have to do in an emergency room, right? You have to figure out what the first problem is that you have to handle. What do I have to deal with immediately? The other thing is we didn't quite talk about how you got from the emergency room to NBC and hanging with Al Roker, which is, not everybody's path. But there is something about you're very concise. You're a very clear communicator in your role as a medical correspondent. How do you think your experience is specifically, not just a doctor, but specifically as an emergency room doctor, how do you think that experience helped you learn to communicate information concisely and quickly?
So I think there's a couple of different things and a couple of different reasons, and I'll go back even a little bit further. I attribute a lot of this to an attending I had when I was a resident. And the attending, they're the bosses, they're the professors essentially on the ward. And so when you see a patient, that you'll later present that patient to the attending, and they can help you figure out what to do because you're still in the learning process. I had an attending that every now and then, so a couple times a week, he would say, "I'm not a professor of medicine today. I'm an 81-year-old grandmother. So talk to me like I'm an 81-year-old grandmother." And you would start saying things in medical language because we have a different language. And he would say, I don't understand. And you'd have to bring it down to a level that they would understand, yet giving the same information. So that's how I learned to communicate, not in medical language, but in language people can understand. And then in the ER, one of the things you learn is, a couple of things. One, is you have to be able to assimilate information very quickly, incomplete information, and make decisions based on that are life or death decisions. Luckily at NBC News, they're not life or death decisions in that moment, but oftentimes, especially with breaking news, I have to be able to assimilate incomplete information and get that information digested to what people should, I want people to understand or know. The other thing is you end up talking to a lot of patients and a lot of patients' families, and sometimes it's in very bad situations. And so you have to be able to empathize with them and understand what message they need to get, what message they want to get, versus all the information you could give them. And so you need to filter out all the information that you could give them and boil it down to the information that they need in that moment, that they want in that moment, that they should have in that moment. And so I think both of those over my career in the emergency room taught me to be able to do that very quickly, to be able to again, distill things down into information that people can use, but not give them too much information, because once you start getting too much information, it starts opening up those other algorithms or avenues where it starts going down these rabbit holes that nobody needs to go down, and starts getting very confusing.
And you have covered, for NBC, if there's if there's a hurricane, if there's you get sent to cover a lot of these things. How do you, does your desire to kind of be the emergency room doctor ever kick in? Or, because you actually have to, as a journalist, which is your role now, you kind of have to step back and observe and relate. And often you have, that much time to do so. Is it hard to find that back to as a doctor, there's distance, you're there,
Right.
and you you've got to keep it when you're as a journalist. Is that strange?
Strangely, the answer is yes and no. Because yes, you want to do your journalism job because I'm trying to get the information that I need to develop the story to give people the information that they need or should have. But at the same time, I'm a doctor. And when I first went to NBC, and this even started earlier at the stations I worked at in Colorado, is I told them, and I've been very blunt from day one, I am first and foremost a doctor. I took an oath to do no harm and to treat patients. And so first and foremost, I'm a doctor. If we're in the middle of a situation that requires an immediate care right now, as in me stepping into my doctor role, I'm no longer going to be a journalist during that time period. I'm going to be a doctor. If you're filming, I go with producers, I go with camera people, you guys do what you need to do, but I'm going to step into the doctor role. And then once the doctor role's over and I get to where I can be a journalist again without worrying about the patient's care or health, then I'll switch to the journalist role and I'll explain what I did if I am able to, based on patient confidentiality and all that stuff. But first and foremost, again, I walked in day one, I said, I'm first and foremost a doctor. I took an oath. I'm going to honor that oath strictly. And so if something happens and I need to be a doctor, I'm not going to be a journalist in that time period. And as long as you're okay with that, then I'm okay with being here.
It's also interesting to me that so much of what you do now on NBC, I think people don't realize, and I became more familiar with this when I worked in news for a little while, and when I was, when I'm interviewed, when I'm on, on a book tour or whatever, that, a long segment on a morning show is like 2 minutes, if you're lucky. 5 is like, oh my God, and to go from that kind of storytelling, that very concise, little focus lens storytelling, to writing your first book, that was a big jump. What made you want to share all this information?
Started doing this a couple of years ago, even way before the pandemic. And a lot of this was built on what I experienced through life and what I saw in the emergency room and at NBC News, seeing how people went through different crises, different emergencies, like, hurricanes and other disasters, and realizing that they didn't really have that. And it's not that they didn't care or they weren't smart enough for it. It's just they didn't have that knowledge of what they needed to do that I've been trained in all my life. And so I thought, let's give them some basic tips that can help them out, again, in any situation, and overall themes. And then we can boil down to specifics for specific situations. And so I started thinking about that and started talking to a variety of people and saying, that would be a good thing to do. And then along the line, I met Joe. And then Joe turned out to be as avid about this as I am. And we turned into, it was funny, on the phone conversations, we're almost like two little kids talking about oh my gosh, and you can get the special tool and you can get
I know, thank you. I can see him he's on the phone with you and I'm like, stop ordering things. Stop.
And then our next conversation is you'll never guess what I got. Oh my gosh, it's the greatest thing ever.
Joe had such a blast working on this, also because it's incredibly useful, but you guys did such a great job together of offering important information, but also making it very accessible and interesting to read about. And it's not often that you can read a survivalist book that talks about narwhal tusks. That's it's
or a pint of beer.
Say again.
Or a pint of beer.
Or a pint of beer. Pints of beer as a weapon. Of course, both of these stories take place in London because it's fantastic. Only there can you have narwhal tusks and pints of beer in a survival scene. But we're trying to get. I think we may have a visitor.
All right, Joe.
Hello. I'm coming to you from the basement.
I love the hat.
I'm ready to fight crime or maybe bears.
You're looking good. I'm loving it.
I just don't know how to use some of these things. I have these, which are very handy.
Oh yeah, those come in handy for all
buys things, John, and he doesn't know how to use them.
No, but actually, this if I felt like if I had one of these, it was all I needed for the entire day, just working in the yard. and I got one of these, and because it has this little circle, and it says like one-handed opening. So let's see if I can pull that off. Look at that.
All right. Now the
So
closing's the
that's-
harder part, but
I don't know how to close it,
I'm going to
but
get the
that's
duct
okay.
tape right now.
I have a little shovel.
oh,
that
there
I'm
you
supposed
go.
to take into the woods with me to, make a latrine, but it seems very, very small.
I can't get him to go camping with me, by the way. I mean,
Oh,
all of
that's,
it. Yeah. Okay.
no, you have to go try these things out.
Yeah, I know. I also wanted to show you my Uberleben. It's a
This is,
I'm
hey,
supposed
this is the show. When kids watch this show.
well, it's a steel rod, and it's very long, and I'm supposed to use this by scraping it, and then I would start a fire if I
Exactly.
didn't have matches.
Yeah, the fire rods and those are great. And the point there is one of the big things we talk about in the bug out bag is having some way to start a fire, both for being able to eat, having heat, and then just having what you brought up, Joe, that comfort of the fire. Just it's something innate in us and wanting to have a fire. But you have to know how to use those. So hopefully you've gone at least to your backyard and playing around a little bit with them. I'm saying backyard because I know you would not do that inside. Right,
I understand it. I'm actually hoping for a household disaster. I can just stay home. That's about the state of it. All right, I have to go put out a fire now. That's in the
Go get the
wire.
duct tape and I'll be there in just hang on. Okay.
I like the headline.
John's
Very
cocktail.
nice.
Take care. See ya.
We all need John's cocktail now. Okay. No, you guys did. I mean, you guys, it was adorable to watch how great you guys got on, and it's been terrifying for me, but whatever, it's fine. So now let us see Little Jumbo. Thank you, Shawl Gray, co-owner of Little Jumbo. Let's see what Dr. Disaster's specialty cocktail is. Here we go. It's a beaut. It's the Death
Flip. I love that.
Flip. And it's got tequila and Jägermeister and an egg.
Wow.
I mean, so these are all like Shawl Gray, one of the co-owners of Little Jumbo here in Asheville. And someday you'll come to Asheville after all of this, and we'll do one of these in person. He knows he is an expert on the history of cocktails. And this one is strained into one of my favorite pieces of glassware, the coupe glass. So I'm very excited about that. So this is the recipe for the Death Flip. It will go out. It'll be available. I'll send the recap, and we'll have information about the Death Flip. But there's your cocktail, Dr. John.
Very excited. I certainly have to try that. Definitely want to come out to Asheville, so I will try it with you guys.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so let's look. We've got a couple questions here. Let's see what we have. Oh goodness. 25 hopeless. Yeah. I want to talk about this because I think part of survival is emotional survival. And so we had Wayne wrote about my sweet lady friend passed away March 15th, and I'm just wrecked. She was under hospice care, which I have very extensive experience with, for the last 3 years and suffered heart failure. I, along with everyone else who has lost someone, many to this awful pandemic, are struggling to find hopefulness in the future. How are we supposed to survive this? And we haven't talked a lot about the pandemic and loss and grief and dealing with grief under these circumstances where we can't come together and grieve the ways we would like to.
Exactly. And that social interaction is such an important thing. That's just us humans. That's something that we are very much ingrained to doing on a constant basis. And when you can't have that, that can even more so heighten that isolation, that feeling of needing emotional support. And yeah, we talk all the time about doing it by distance, doing it through social media. It's not quite the same thing. But one of the things I think, regardless of the survival situation you're in, most of the ones we talk about are situations that take place over a few days at the most. And so you get through them very quickly and are unexpected. These ones are tougher because they're more long-term, and you are at an emotional high trying to support somebody else throughout all this. And then when you get to that point, all of a sudden everything kind of lets out and you have this emotional low where you're no longer supporting them, but there's nobody there to support you. And so that can be extremely tough. So finding that support system is important, but also as cheesy as it might be to say, having that will to survive is extremely important as well. And I talk about that in situations we talk about in the book, which are the physical situations that are out there for disasters, but also in emotional situations. That's extremely important as well. And oftentimes in the emergency room, I would see people that would be at the end of their tether and would do things to try and end their life. And we would basically bring them back to a healthy state and then talk to them the next day or the day after. And they would often tell me that it seemed like they had no other alternative. But then later on, when they found out that, as time went on, they realized they just weren't in that state to have the alternative. So one of the things I mention to people is, please, if you're at that stage, please, call somebody. There's helplines you can call, try and get a hold of somebody, and don't be embarrassed to tell them, hey, I think I'm at the end of my tether. I think I'm going to do something that I'm going to regret, or it's really going to cause a lot of problems. And then try and get those connections as best you can. Now, thankfully, we have, the vaccines out, and the CDC has put out the information that if you're vaccinated, you can certainly be around other people that are vaccinated. You can be around a household of people that aren't vaccinated, as long as it's from a single household. So hopefully those connections can help a little bit as well. But realize that this is a very tough situation, and it's going to continue to be for the next few months until we get through it.
It is so tough. And, there is a big difference between physical survival and emotional survival. I really thank you so much for asking that question, Wayne, and sharing that with us, because you talk about, you go into survival mode when you are taking care of someone who's in hospice. And so much of your energy is on that person. And then when you lose that person, we went through this with my mother. And when you lose that person, you're at a loss for what to do, where to go, and to not be able to connect with others, and have the pandemic on top of that is just very, very trying for so many people. So find those connections. Thank you for asking that question, Wayne, and sharing that.
And just real quick, I want to add too that, and not just with this, but with other things during the pandemic, that mental health toll is going to be ongoing for years and years to come. So keep that in mind too, as the years go forward, that all of a sudden 2 years from now, something might pop up that you can't quite figure out why that's happened. And it could be happening because of the experiences you had in the pandemic. And then definitely try to get those connections, seek that help if you need to.
And I feel like I actually feel, because as a country, as a world, we're still so much in, dealing with the pandemic, that we haven't really even started to talk about the emotional, mental toll that this is going to take on all of us.
Everybody, right.
That's going to be, I think, like you said, that will be like an ongoing challenge, won't it?
It'll be an ongoing challenge. And then if you can think about it, us in our adult stages, it's going to be one thing, but the children that are growing up right now in this era, in this pandemic, it's going to take a huge toll on them as well. Especially, for us, we might not think a year off from school is that bad. For them, that's a huge year. That is a lifetime for them. And then they have to try to make those developments happen again. It's not always going to be the way it was before. As a matter of fact, it's probably not ever going to be the way it was before. And so they have to learn how to adapt moving forward. And even though they're very resilient, they adapt very well, it's still going to take a toll on them. So we definitely need to keep an eye on ourselves, but we particularly need to keep an eye on them.
Okay. Yes, and let's all stay connected however we can. Oh, somebody asked, what does it mean to check your six?
So check your six means it comes from being in the airplanes. Oftentimes when you're flying around and you're trying to see if the enemy's behind you, you have to check your six, which means it's using the clock system. So straight ahead of me is 12 o'clock, off to the right 3 o'clock. This is 9 o'clock. Behind me is 6 o'clock. So often it'd be like, check six. And so you just need to look behind you because somebody has seen something that you haven't. And so when it comes to that, keep your head on a swivel, that situational awareness, it's a good idea to every now and then just kind of look behind you. You don't have to make it obvious. Just look behind you to see what might be coming up. Probably nothing, but you never know.
All right. And Lauren asks, she says, you've been in so many difficult situations, and this as a pilot, as an emergency room doctor, and actually as an NBC correspondent. What is the most scared you've ever been?
It probably has to do with my wife. No, not really. I'm trying to think of the most scared I've ever been is probably in the middle of the emergency room when I'm working with a patient and the patient is dying and nothing I'm doing is actually helping at that point, and trying to reach deeper and deeper into my bucket of knowledge and tools to try and get it to work. And then you get a sense of helplessness at that point, and you do get very concerned and very scared for the patient mainly. And so there were numerous instances of that happening. And again, what I mentioned is even though internally I might be scared, externally I'm trying to keep as calm and collective as possible because I'm the leader of a medical team that's taking care of them. And I want to make sure that everybody understands that I'm the one making the decisions. I'm the one with the confidence. And so I have to exude that confidence. I can't let them know how I am. Afterwards, we talk about it and we say, yeah, this wasn't something that I was dealing with very well internally, but externally they'll usually say, well, you did a great job. There wasn't much else we could do. And that just gets tough. And I think I'm waiting for Denise to reconnect. And so I'm not sure if it's her connection or my connection, but Joe does have those pockets he's been wearing for a long time.
It's Joe in the basement. Here I am. Hi.
All right.
Hi. I don't know what happened. It's
Joe. You never know.
There's all sorts of stuff going on. Yeah, but I could hear what you were saying, strangely.
Good.
Okay. Okay, so I think we have one more question. Oh, can you tell us anything about lightning?
You bet. And actually, now that I thought about it for a second, let me explain the most scared I ever was. It was the first time I soloed in a jet aircraft, in a fighter aircraft. And we did that. And for some reason, I'm not exactly sure why they did this, but they invited your wife to watch you solo for the first time. And it's a very risky adventure. And so the whole time you're scared because you're like, the last thing I want to do is crash and have my wife watch me crash. And so you're up there and you are just like shaking in your boots the whole time. Luckily, you're in the airplane by yourself, but it gets to be quite daunting. And afterwards, you're like, why did you invite my wife? That doesn't make any sense. But it was tradition. And the military sticks with tradition. But as far as the lightning, what was the question? I'm sorry.
Oh, can you tell us? I guess it's about being struck by lightning. Can you tell us anything about lightning?
You don't want to be struck by lightning, first and foremost. And there is a lot of power behind lightning, and that is going to cause a big issue. And the main issue it causes are a couple things. One, there's the thermal energy behind the lightning. And so that's the heat that it produces that can cause a lot of energy. It can actually fry the tissue as it goes through. And we'll see the marks, it's called ferning on the body, as the lightning has moved through their body. And people, it's very frequent where somebody will say, lightning went in my shoulder and came out my right foot, and it tore off a couple of toes on their right foot. There's so much energy behind that. But more importantly, lightning, the deadly part of lightning is the electricity, not the warmth part, but the electricity, because that can stop your heart. And that heart needs to be restarted very quickly because we mentioned 3 minutes without oxygen, the rules of 3. If your heart stops, that starts the clock. So you have 3 minutes to get it restarted. Lightning can do that. And so getting that heart restarted is the most critical thing at that point. But lightning, you never know when it's going to hit. If there's a saying, and we put in the book, if thunder roars, go indoors. And so even though people have different formulas for how far away lightning is, counting seconds and things like that, and if you're more than 6 miles, not a big deal. No, if you hear the thunder, lightning's there too, get indoors. But when you're indoors, you want to stay away from, a lot of people think I'm on a patio, not a big deal with an overhang. No, you want to be completely indoors. You want the walls surrounding you. Stay off landlines. Don't do anything using, don't take a shower because the piping itself could carry the electricity. So just be careful.
Okay. I think that's it. And it's 8 o'clock. So this is an awesome book. It's very helpful. I mean, we've had a lot of laughs tonight, but it's extremely helpful. There's a lot of very good practical advice in here. Easy to read. You can order it, like I said, right here by clicking. You can order from Malaprops. And if you put in the notes that you want to get, you want to have a signed book signed by Dr. John Torres, just put that in your notes, and he will send some book plates over to Malaprops if you do that, and they will ship it out to you with a signed book plate in it. And John, where can people follow you? Like, do you have a, online on the interwebs? Where can
on Twitter it's at Dr. John Torres, just spelled like that, Dr. John Torres, all one word. On Instagram, Dr. John Torres, and on Facebook Live or Facebook, Dr. John Torres. I do, in case people are interested, I do Facebook Live twice a week where I go over essentially a synopsis of the headlines behind the pandemic and give people information of what that headline means, really, not just the words in that sentence, but what it means for them. And then once a week, I do what's called a daily doc, where I speak with an expert around the world about different pandemic subjects and just kind of pick their brain the whole time. So they're both good, and they're both on Facebook. And Facebook is Dr. John Torres.
Dr. John Torres. Okay, and everybody, that's great to know. We are going to put all of that in. Oh, and check Linda Torres says, check NBC News Live posts on Facebook. Okay, great. So we're going to put all of these links. We have some in the chat. We're going to send out a recap, as I always do, and we will have all of those links in there. You can go ahead and buy Dr. John Torres's fantastic book. And thanks everybody for showing up. And thank you, John, for coming. This has been so much fun. And this will be up on YouTube, and you can share it with your folks and friends. And we've got so much fun coming on Craft in the next couple months, and I'll put that in the recap too. But for now, everybody take care of each other, be safe, be well, be healthy, stay connected. And thanks for coming out. Bye, John. Bye, everybody.
Talk to you later. Bye.